Hello and welcome to Become the Teapot. I'm Old Man Iain.
And so am I.
Now, each episode we watch a comic book movie and read the comics on which it is based in order to get my friend Iain here to read more comics. But we hesitate to say that's what we're doing here today because, although the film that we'll be discussing takes some inspiration from this episode's comic, it is so slight, so perfunctory, so infinitesimally minute that it's a bit of a stretch to say that it's based on this comic at all. Nevertheless, we're going to be diving back into the hugely inconsistent Fox Xmen film franchise for the fifth time since this podcast began, as we discuss 2017's Logan and compare it to Wolverine Volume 3 issues 66 to 72, plus the subsequent giant-size special, otherwise known as Old Man Logan. So let's put aside the comic for the time being. What do you think of the film, Logan?
Yeah, really good. I would say probably one of the best X-Men films. Mm-hmm. It stands alone, I think. If you were to just watch this with some understanding of the X-Men, then I think you would enjoy it probably a lot more than if you've watched the previous films.
Because it is a bit sad to think that all the characters that you know and love from the previous films are dead and buried. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Spoilers. They're all dead. Well, it'd be hard to find someone, I guess, who's not seen this film, who is a comic book fan.
Yeah, probably. I mean, it came out in, 2017, so it's a relatively recent one.
I mean, I think, even though it is quite dark, it's also quite fun as well. It's like a Western road trip movie with Charles and Logan.
Yeah, and the comic is a Western road trip as well, so that's one of the few things it does actually take from the comic. But I know what you're saying. I mean, I liked the film a lot more this time around than I remembered liking it before.
Yeah.
Because I think the last time I saw this film was probably in the cinema, and I remember it being okay. I enjoyed it. I thought it was all right. But actually going back and re-watching it, I found a lot more to enjoy this time around.
Yeah. Well, two things, actually, that I forgot about this film. One, how long it is. Because it is quite a long film. Clocks in just over 2 hours.
Yeah.
And also that it had Richard E. Grant in it.
Yeah, that was a shock.
Completely forgot.
Yeah, me too. He's not in it that much, is he? And he sort of crops up about halfway through the film. I felt he could have done a bit more, but...
Yeah, he plays Dr. Rice, which I assume you know more about him than I do.
Well, Xander Rice, and he says in the film his father was involved with the Weapon X program and was one of the people who put the adamantium in Wolverine. But yeah, obviously he doesn't feature in the comic book we're reading today.
So is he Stryker's son in the comics, or are we led to believe that he's Stryker's son in the films?
No, his dad is not Stryker.
Right, okay.
Because Stryker's not the guy who really put the adamantium in Wolverine. He's just was involved with the project in a sort of military capacity.
Right, okay.
And in the comics, he's not involved with that project at all. So yeah, no, nothing to do, as far as I know, with Stryker.
Okay.
But I did think he was underutilised in this. But I did like that bit at the end where he's sort of doing the classic exposition and then just gets shot in the throat mid-sentence. I was like, okay, fair enough. But yeah, a bit of a waste of his talents, I felt. I think a lot of people when this film was being made assumed he would be Mr. Sinister or something like that. And it just turns out he's the son of one of the scientists, you know?
Yeah, I mean, they had a lot of loose threads to pick up from all the previous films, which included from, is it the Wolverine? No, X-Men Apocalypse, I think it is.
Okay.
When you see the case and it says Mr. Sinister's real name on
Nathaniel Essex.
Yeah, I think there's a scene at the end of one of the films, which would have been quite nice if they'd picked up from that, but they kind of went in a different way.
It's also mentioned quite heavily in New Mutants. They never quite got around to getting Mr. Sinister in any of these films, but I don't think there was any intention to get him into this one. There's already quite a lot going on. I feel like you have all these different vignettes throughout the film, and there's already quite a lot happens, which is probably the explanation for that over 2 hour runtime. And I think some of it works really well and some of it works less well. I like that sort of fractured domestic life that Logan and Xavier have. But I think that certain sections of the film are just a little bit messy. I mean, my overriding memory of this from the first time I watched it was I disliked that the Wolverine clone was the final boss fight.
Yeah.
And even watching it now, it feels a bit strange and anticlimactic in a story that had sort of thus far been comparatively more cerebral than the standard superhero film. So the ending, just with what was a standard hero versus hero but villain, literally in this case his clone,
Yeah.
just felt a bit lazy. I also dislike how easily he's killed, and I don't quite understand how an adamantium bullet is any more deadly than a normal bullet fired through an eye socket. I still don't understand.
Well, they have the mysterious powers of the adamantium bullet.
Yeah.
They make up what it does. It might kill him, it might wipe his memory.
Yeah, and it blows a massive chunk out of his skull, whereas the one in Origins only put a small hole in it, which we then didn't see in the scans taken of his head in previous X-Men films. So again, doesn't work. This is going back to what I was saying about the inconsistencies in the X-Line. Nothing really makes much sense when you give it any second thought. If an adamantium bullet is going to kill him, why? Why does it need to be an adamantium bullet? Why can't you just fire a bullet through his eye socket and kill him?
Yeah.
Why does the fact that it's adamantium and has to penetrate the skull mean anything?
They could use an adamantium chainsaw and saw off his head.
But again, why does it have to be adamantium?
All right, fair enough.
That's my problem with this. They just threw the word adamantium in. It should have been, this is a magic bullet, but they just threw the word adamantium in instead. But anyway, I mean, and then Logan dies by, again, anticlimactically, falling on a log, which is, who knew all along he was a vampire? But it's, I feel like there should have been a bit more of a grandiose way of him going out.
Yeah, maybe more of a sacrifice kind of way. Although we've seen that sort of covered in previous films, like X-Men: The Last Stand.
Yeah.
When he sort of goes to sacrifice himself when he's killing Jean Grey.
Yeah, and it was still a sacrifice in a way. I appreciate that. I just felt it was a little bit, in the comics when they decided to kill off Wolverine or Logan, they covered him in adamantium and he became sort of a statue. But, that said, if we are to take X-24, the Wolverine clone, as a metaphor for Logan battling and coming to terms with his past, then I'm more forgiving of that as a twist. I think it's less about the fight and more about what it represents in that event.
Yeah, I think it's how his character was in previous films and the fact that you've got him, but in the ultimate feral way.
Yeah.
When he first came to Charles, he was this kind of beast, this Wolverine, if you will. And then he learns and he grows and all of this stuff.
Yeah, and also it's sort of a way he could have gone. He could have just become a weapon and become a deadly killing machine for the rest of his life, but instead he found the X-Men, he found Charles, and he became something more, which is ultimately what he wants for Laura at the end of the film. So I get that is playing into that metaphor, but as I say, the whole cloned Logan thing, I felt like there could have been a more satisfactory conclusion.
Yeah, I was watching it yesterday and thinking, because it's a different world, this film could easily be put into the MCU because of, like you've literally just said, the bad guy is an evil version of the good guy.
Yeah.
So they almost kind of follow especially phase 1 of the MCU plotline.
But in fairness, that's not just restricted to the MCU. Yeah, that was in the first Wolverine film as well. We had the Deadpool version, which was essentially just Wolverine plus a couple of extra powers. So it's not something that is exclusive to the MCU. It's just something that they have leaned heavily on as a crutch.
Yeah.
I mean, in general, I enjoyed the film, as I say, a lot more this time around. I like the sort of weathered, lived-in world that it has, that the comic has as well, actually, but obviously in a completely different way. And I like you say, that dynamic between Charles, Logan, and Laura, with Logan coming to terms with his aging and being confronted by both his past and his future in both these people and the X-24 clone. So yeah, I think there's a lot going on in it. I think from a subtext point of view, which is something that some of the other X films and a lot of the Marvel films are lacking, I feel there is a lot more going on under the surface here. It's not just about, superheroics and colourful outfits and heroes versus villains. I think there's a lot more nuance to it that I perhaps didn't pick up the first time I watched it, where I just came away thinking it was a fairly average superhero film with a slightly disappointing ending.
Well, you've got so many things that aren't the sort of focal point, I guess, of it. You've got him coming to terms, as you said, with his age and accepting his past. And almost the fact that he had to go back to the way he was to finish off his life or his story, if you will.
Yeah.
Which, yeah, I appreciated that a lot more now than I did back then.
Yeah, and that appears in the comic book a little bit, is this idea of you can't leave behind who you were entirely. But yeah, I agree there. And I think the cast and the supporting cast do a really good job with it. You know, sometimes it's in relatively thankless roles, but I was especially pleased to see people like Stephen Merchant. That still holds up as well as I remember. He's obviously mostly known as a comedic actor, and obviously there is comedy there, but I think he really plays it with a straight bat and does a good job with it. And I think that actually goes for everyone. I think when you are attempting to ground the X-Men franchise, the superhero franchise, in a sort of gritty and realistic world, you've got to play it straight, which I think there's been a tendency with the X-Men franchise so far to keep giving those knowing winks. You know, there's little, oh, we know what we're doing is stupid, don't worry about it. Whereas this, they just play it straight. They go, we're going to go gritty, we're going to go realistic. Wolverine's going to swear pretty much every line of the movie. Everyone is going to play their roles as if they were doing King Lear, you know?
I did like when Charles started swearing at him. I think they were in the car and they were like, oh, fuck off, Logan. I was like, yes, Charles. I think you've got to a point of his life where you don't care for his shit anymore.
Yeah. And it feels a little bit out of character for Professor X, just because obviously you expect these things from Logan, but he's a more of a gritty, down-to-earth character who you would expect to say that. Whereas from Professor X, it seems strange, but I suppose we've never seen a nonagenarian Professor X before.
What did you think of him being paired up with Charles? Obviously, in the comic, which we'll come to in a bit, it's Hawkeye.
Yeah.
But in the film, they've done Old Man Charles.
Well, they've done Old Man Charles, but they've also done Laura. And I think that's the important differentiation. I think having an older and a younger travel companion, two people instead of one as well, a father figure and a daughter figure. It's interesting. I really like Laura in this film, X-23. I would have liked to see more from her as well. Although I'm a bit confused about if you put adamantium on a child's skeleton, surely they cannot grow anymore.
Yeah. Good point.
She's going to have seriously stunted growth from now on.
So is she exactly the same? So is all her bones covered, or did she just get the claws?
It might just be the claws. In the film, I swear they showed her opening up her shins and things like that, and there was surgery on her arms and legs.
Yeah.
I know she's got the claws in her feet, but I don't seem they need to open the shins for that. But anyway, I mean, that's just an observation. That's by the by. But I like the use of Charles and Laura, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, I think it works really well. I was thinking about how they could change this film and not fuck it up, really. Because obviously when this film came out, the studio still had the Fantastic Four.
They did.
And we'll go into my thoughts on the comics in a bit, but I thought maybe they could have intertwined Fantastic Four characters. So I do like the use of Charles, but they could also have like an old version of The Thing.
Yeah.
Or, you know, something like that.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. And again, we'll talk about that when we come onto the comic, about why they chose to use Hawkeye in the comic book. But I think in a film where a lot is already happening, to introduce a brand new, presumably, Fantastic Four or Thing, perhaps would have been one step too far. I think having it be a pre-existing character, it changes it entirely from what we get in the comic book. But I think what it does is still a good use of the characters. But yeah, I get what you're saying. In fact, you know, I was going to ask you this. Without going into details of the comic book's events, what do you make of the world that they've created here and how it differentiates from the comic book?
It's not as post-apocalyptic.
Yeah.
It kind of still feels like now. I think it's set in 2028.
2029.
So 2029. Yeah. So obviously we're closer now than we were then.
Yeah. Well, it was only
how time works.
It was only 12 years anyway. So.
Well, yeah. But I mean, I feel like they could have gone a little bit further with it. So set it a little bit more in the future.
Yeah. And I get why they didn't, because they obviously want to use an older Charles in that. So, you know, if you had gone another 10 years in the future, Charles would have been over 100 and it wouldn't have made much sense. The further forward you go, the less possible that becomes. Like you say, it's a very different version of a future. The comic is very much post-apocalyptic. This definitely seems more bleak, but believable and pretty much akin to our sort of modern day visions of what a future would be like. So it's very much a corporate America as opposed to a Wild West one.
Yeah. You do get little areas of it. So you've got like where he lives in his little hideout place. That's quite out in the sticks. And you can believe that's like a post-apocalyptic world.
Yeah.
But then when they go to, I don't think it's Vegas, maybe Reno, I don't know. They go somewhere and it kind of looks like it does now. It's like, well, you've got these clubs, you've got the casinos, you've got the hotels, you've got the cars. It just feels like now, but a little bit worse. It should be more apocalyptic, is what I'm saying.
Well, the comic book is. I think what they've done works for the film, but it is a very different take on an older Logan. Grounding it a bit more, 10 years, 12 years in the future, means that they've been able to play into themes that are relevant to today's issues. So ultimately, this is a big blockbuster X-Men film that deals with safe passage and immigration and the evils of big corporations.
Yeah.
So these are things, actually, we talked about this during our X month we did, about the mutant metaphor. The idea that mutants can stand in for gay rights, as they did early in the franchise, for civil rights, as we saw in early X-Men. A big thing that's drawn is between Martin Luther King and Malcolm X, being Charles and Magneto. It's not the best comparison, in all honesty. It sort of simplifies that whole thing entirely, but it is a comparison, a metaphor that has been drawn. And as such, I think that it's really nice to see in a big screen adaptation of this, that sort of mutant metaphor coming back to the fore. And I think of all of Fox's X-Men films, this does the most with that idea.
Oh, yeah, 100%. I mean, you've had like previous comments and even jokes like in X2, you know, have you tried not being a mutant? It's like, yeah, haha, we get it. Your son's not gay, you know, he's not a mutant. You know, it's like that is being played for laughs.
Yeah, to an extent.
You feel that this can be real, and like you said, they've set it not too far in the future, but it's still grounded so that they can put forward the ideas of what it means to be a mutant. Whereas the older films were a little bit like, ha ha ha, jokes are all round.
Yeah, and that was, again, with this playing with a straight bat, is the older films, even when they did lean into that mutant metaphor, always did it with a knowing wink and a nod. They never just went, right, we're going to take this seriously. You know, this is a metaphor for greater and more impactful things and more important things. And if you're dealing with those subjects and you actually want to deal with them, you've got to sort of play it a little bit straighter, I think.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, generally speaking, though, I think this film does that really well.
Yeah, I enjoyed going back to it. In fact, I did see actually on my Blu-ray, there is a black and white version, which I'm intrigued to watch at some point. Not right now, because I've just watched it, but at some point in the future, I think I will opt to use that one and see if it changes it.
It was a bit of a trend at the time, I remember, because they did a black and chrome version of Mad Max, and I enjoyed it, but it was sort of a novelty factor. It's like, okay, now I can watch this in black and chrome, but or black and white. But yeah, it is very much a novelty thing. But you'll have to let me know what that's. I've not seen it in the black and white version either.
Yeah, I'm curious if it makes the place look older. I don't know if they've literally just turned it into black and white or they've changed the lighting a little bit. I don't know.
Because obviously the film itself plays into a lot of the tropes of old westerns, as you said. So I think setting it as an old western, even though a lot of those westerns were in colour, setting it in that sort of that older film context, it might just give it a sort of extra level of grittiness, toning down a lot of those colours and the splashes of blood and things, and just setting it as a black and white thing. Yeah, I'd be interested to know.
Yeah.
But I think we've discussed the film enough. Shall we move on to the comic book?
Yeah, let's go straight into it.
Okay, great. So let's start with the basics. What do you think of Wolverine Volume 3, number 66 to number 72, plus Giant Size Old Man Logan number 1? There's a mouthful.
I'm so glad that was you saying it and not me. Yeah, so I was actually quite glad that you put this one on our list, because it's one that I've been planning on reading for such a long time, and the fact that I do love the film. So it's something that I've always thought, I'll get round to that at some point, and I never did. But yeah, I'm glad that I have picked it up after all of these years. Like we said, it's a U-turn away from the film. They've literally just taken the name. Well, not really.
No, not even that, really.
Yeah, a third of the title of the book.
There's a few things in it that are similar, as we said. The road trip style story structure is there, and you've got an older Logan. And that is pretty much it.
There's cars in the comic. There's cars in the film.
Well, that goes into the road trip thing.
But yeah, no, I wasn't expecting it to be as gory. I mean, I don't really know what I was expecting, because the film is also pretty bloody. But yeah, a lot happens. A lot is going on in this comic.
Yeah.
I feel like when I was reading the comic, this could have been turned into a film like Captain America Civil War was. The fact that you've got all these other characters coming into it.
But of course, Civil War, as we'll talk about in about 4 weeks' time, is a comic book that exists, but again, it takes the bare bones of that idea and completely re-implements it for the screen.
Yeah. I think what I mean is the fact that if they were turning this into a film in part of the MCU, you could easily, incorporate the Hulk gang, Kingpin, all these characters that have turned up in the story. You can have like a big 2.5 hour long film that has all these other characters. Whereas I think the film, because of when it came out and the rights that they had at the time, it works well. The comic, as I said, there's a lot happening and it is crazy and it's bloody and gory and it's great.
Yeah. For any listeners who have not read it, the story itself is a sort of classic Western tale set in a Mad Max-like post-apocalyptic future. It's an alternate future in which all of the villains, all the Marvel villains you know and love, united to defeat the heroes, and then afterwards they carved up the United States between themselves, and everyone else has become either a scavenger or an old-timey farmer, apparently. Canonically, it's not the first appearance of Old Man Logan. That came in a comic, Fantastic Four 558, that Mark Millar was also writing at the time, and he was seen with a adult Bruce Banner Jr., so presumably that story is to come after the end of this story.
That would make sense,
in a chronological order. But that's by the by, that's irrelevant to what we're discussing here. What did you think of the world that Mark Millar and Steve McNiven created here?
I think it works really well, considering if you just take the plot points itself and you just said, right, I've got this story, this guy goes off to find his old friend, and they travel across the country, you'll be a little bit like, oh, okay. But when you start adding the characters and the background of what's happening in these areas that, as you say, have been segregated in a way that you've got owners of certain areas, it works so well. And the fact that this does really feel post-apocalyptic.
Yeah. What I really like about this comic book is the road trip, which makes up the lion's share of the story, but the way that is used, so we are seeing the world through the character's eyes and this sort of weathered version of the Marvel world and how it's changed. And all of these allusions to characters, like you say, are told not through exposition. They're just seen through these little vignettes, these little parts we see. We see hammer falls. We see Thor's hammer discarded on the floor. We don't see what happens to Thor, but we can interpret that.
Yeah.
And likewise, we see the Baxter building on top of Loki in Wyoming, of all places.
Yeah.
We see Dwight's Toll with the ants. We see pinfalls, all of these things. We don't see the events that actually cause them. We see the aftermath, and we can infer from that this greater world. And all of these things tell a story without showing the events. I really like that approach to things.
Yeah.
Also, there's just dinosaurs are commonplace in America now, which is just great.
I think I do like that show don't tell idea. Yeah, you could have a character going, oh, that's Thor's hammer. Who's Thor? And like, if you're picking up a comic about Marvel, I'm pretty sure you know who Thor is.
Yeah, we don't need to know how Thor died and why his hammer was in Vegas of all places and this and that. Yeah, we don't need to know all of that. This is 50 years after the fall of all these heroes. The end result is they're not about anymore, and this is all that's left of them.
Yeah.
So what else did you like about the comic?
Well, I think this might have been my thoughts coming off of Sin City and going into this, but it's very violent, and I almost thought you've got Sin City amounts of blood and gore in this. Even first couple of pages when you see this old man Logan, he's like a family man. We've never really seen that in the films as much.
No.
Obviously, I've read a few X-Men comics now because of the podcast, but I feel like it's one that you could just pick up if you knew a little bit about Marvel. This is the comic for that, really.
I mean, Mark Millar is known for his sort of edgy comic books. He uses violence a lot in his comic books, and as such, it's no surprise to see that here. And I think Steve McNiven's art does a really nice job without making the gore and the violence exploitative, but still seem quite real. Yeah. I really like his art in this, the way it's used. I think there's a lot of artists who would have just done extra amounts of gore and really played that up, and I don't think this comic would have worked anywhere near as well if they had done that, because so much of this comic book is about the world and about these little nods and these winks to everything, Moloids, we've got Ghost Riders, Kingpins, Spider-Girl, all of these references to 50, 60 years of Marvel history. And it's so much about that. And I think that if you went full on the gore and full on all the violence, it would get lost beneath that, because there is a lot of it.
You take away from it. I think.
But I think Steve McNiven finds the right balance between that sort of old school, drawing of the Spider-Mobile, the spider buggy, but also having the moloids eating people and things like that. That balance is right, I think.
Just to go on from the car there, I was very impressed to see that in there. My brain sort of half knew what it was, and then it's when Hawkeye said, that's Spidey's old car, which I love the fact that Spider-Man, A, he doesn't have to have a car because he's Spider-Man, but also B, that I'm pretty sure it was drawn into the comics or cartoons to make some profit out of toys.
Probably, yeah. I would imagine so. I think even in the comic books, it was a sponsored car that he was given by a company. So there's an extra level of metatextuality there. You mentioned Hawkeye there. What did you make of the use of him as the travel companion?
I really liked him. I mean, I know that Hawkeye, especially because of the first Avengers film, has always been a little bit of a joke. He's been like, we've got the Hulk, we've got Captain America, and we've got a guy who shoots arrows. It's like, cool, do you want to join our club? But in this, you do feel like he's a proper character, that he's gone through a lot. Didn't realise that he'd been married 4 times or more.
Well, he has by the point this 50 years later, So.
Yeah. I didn't know that he had a daughter with Peter Parker's daughter. I had to think that one through. So Peter Parker is his daughter's grandfather, which I thought, that's a whole other world to go down, a whole other story arc. They just sort of say it and go, there you go.
Throw it in there.
That happened. And you go, yep, all right. Fine.
And it's created entirely for this storyline, and I like as well that the daughter that Hawkeye was married to is not recognisable as Mary Jane or Gwen Stacy or any of Spider-Man's usual partners. So it's just something that happened somewhere in the 50 years that follow.
It's just sort of there.
Yeah, it's a little bit of world building that we're never party to. We don't know why it came about, but it is what it is.
Well, what it will come back to with comics is in 40 odd years, when someone wants to write a comic, they'll just pick up on that little one thread and they'll go write a 12-art series about something.
I think they may have already revisited Hawkeye's daughter anyway.
Well, there you go. But yeah, there's so many bits in there that, me being a comic book fan, to see all these little small bits coming up, and the fact that you got the Hulk gang, which I've started calling them the inbreedable Hulks, because they are
inbred,
all inbreds and incredible. Yeah. I did a little word joke.
Oh, I see.
That's when you edit in, you laugh.
I'll put some canned laughter in here.
But yeah, so you got the Hulk gang, you got Spider-Girl, which we touched on there, who kills the Kingpin.
And becomes the Kingpin.
Again, spoilers for all of this, but yeah, so kills the Kingpin to become the Kingpin, which I thought, fair enough, that's what you got to do. Black Bolt, he attacks a dinosaur who's absorbed the Venom symbiote.
Yeah, the T-Rex with the Venom symbiote, which is chasing them in the car. Again, it's the juxtaposition between really sort of gritty, violent things happening, and then also a T-Rex covered in a symbiote.
Yeah.
I love that combination of things.
And then to go to the end of the comic, you've got Hulk, who... Is that Bruce Banner?
It is, yes.
It is, yeah. So he's killed Wolverine. He then decided to eat him.
Yeah.
And then I think the readers, or at least I, knew before it was going to happen.
I think everyone did, yeah.
What was going to happen. And then just seeing him slice the Hulk in half from inside.
Yeah.
Again, it's gory. It's not over the top.
Yeah.
But it works so well.
I got to say, the sort of hillbilly Hulks is probably my least favourite part of the comic book. Not only does it play into some rather unfortunate stereotypes, but it also doesn't really make any sense. They're said to be a product of incest between Hulk and She-Hulk. But that only, inbreeding only works with generations of inbreeding. This is set 50 years after the end of the world. So even if we're generous and say that Hulk and She-Hulk immediately started boning after all the villains won and all the heroes died, there would only be about 3 generations at most. So it doesn't make any sense. What the older ones especially wouldn't be inbred at all, especially, as the child of a genius scientist and a lawyer. But whatever. I mean, we have a very similar cannibal, rapey Hulk in Millar's Ultimates that he wrote, as we do here. And it seems a lot more like that version of the Hulk than it does the one that we know in the 616.
Have you read much of the Hulk's other stuff by Mark?
Millar.
Yeah.
I've only really read his Ultimate stuff. I don't know if he's written much for Marvel. I don't think he has. But like much of Mark Millar's work for Marvel, the characters are only sort of superficially recognisable. They look more or less like the characters we know. They have the same abilities, more or less, but they don't really act anything like the characters from the comic books. Not the 616 ones, anyway.
Yeah.
This is particularly evident with the villains that we get, who are just out and out evil. You know, Magneto and things like that we hear about. Why would Magneto, quite a nuanced character in the comic book, team up with the Red Skull, a Nazi? So there's a lot of this, a lot of characters not really acting like themselves to facilitate the storyline. And I can excuse it more here because we can argue that this is 50 years later and the people have changed over time or got worse or whatever it is. But when he writes things like Civil War, it becomes a lot more noticeable, I find.
Yeah.
His sort of grasp on the characters and what motivates them, I don't think is quite there.
Yeah, so it works in this post-apocalyptic 6-issue run.
Yeah.
But then when you put it into the canon 616, his choices are questionable.
Yeah, characters just don't act like the characters that have been written for 50, 60 years. Hulk has never acted like this. And I get that you can say, oh, it's 50 years later and he's lost his mind, but that is a flimsy excuse at best.
Well, yeah.
And this is, again, what happened with Civil War, is that in order to get Tony Stark and Captain America into a conflict, they had to write both of them almost completely out of character. So they all end up acting more like their ultimate companions, you know, the ones from the Ultimate Universe, which are generally not nice people.
So the word ultimate just means prick.
Essentially, yeah. Essentially. As I say, I do enjoy this comic book. I think it's a lot more fun. It's a lot more fun than it has any right to be, really. I think the use of Hawkeye is good. I like that they used a character who wasn't particularly close to Wolverine. He doesn't really know... Well, he doesn't know Logan at all. He only knows him as Wolverine through superheroics. And that's why I think it works. The setup here, Hawkeye going to Logan and recruiting him and him telling him he's not a superhero anymore and he just doesn't really believe him. I think it needs to be that character of one level of separation.
Yeah.
You know, it couldn't have been Charles or it couldn't have been Scott because that wouldn't make sense. And I also like that he's now blind.
Yeah.
Hawkeye's now blind. It's a bit of a twist and it's not through anything, you know, no one ripped out his eyes.
He's
He's just old and
blind.
blind. He's got glaucoma. Yeah, exactly.
What I did like about that is when they're going in to save his daughter, he says something like, "Where's the control panel?" And she says, 31 feet from the left-hand side of my voice. And the next panel is him just one shot.
Yeah.
Bang, it's out. Those little bits I quite like. It's not just he's blind, let's carry on the story. They're adding in these little bits of dialogue that would help you understand how he can still shoot things the way he used to.
Which is ironic, actually, because 616 Hawkeye has had a regular issue with hearing and has often needed a hearing aid to hear. And now on this version of the story, he's doing everything off of his perfect hearing, apparently. Perhaps another indication that this isn't quite the 616 versions we know of these characters just 50 years later. This is an alternate world, you know, an alternate tale.
Yeah.
So what do you make of the twist? The event that broke Wolverine, because in the film it is hinted that it is Charles Xavier that had one of his episodes and killed all of the X-Men. I think it said only 200 injured and 7 killed, which seems low, but okay. Whereas in the comic book, obviously we have a very different tale. So what do you make of that?
I do quite like that you see panels that aren't fully explained and kind of like quite zoomed in. So you don't quite know why it's there. You've got a couple of panels before, you know, him thinking or they say what happened. And then you get like one close up and then it cuts away and then it carries on with the story.
Yeah.
So it's not until issue 4 or 5 towards the end that you actually find out that it was him, which this is probably going to make me sound like a little bit of a sociopath. But I quite like the fact that Mysterio changed his mind or changed what he sees and created the idea that Wolverine would then kill all the X-Men. Think if that happened to you, you were fighting off all these bad guys and you think, yes, I'm the greatest, I know all this sort of stuff.
Easy to imagine. It's every Saturday night for me.
And then you come to and you realise that what you've just done is all one lie.
Oh, not again.
And also the idea that it was Mysterio out of everyone that's just gone, I'll just go and hiss off this character and also take out a lot of the good guys.
I don't think it's entirely believable that Wolverine could actually take down all of the X-Men, but yeah, I get where you're coming from.
Yeah, I think it's a great twist. It's horrible, but it works so well.
And it really does make it believable why that would be the event that would break Wolverine, particularly killing Jubilee, who was his protege, his mentee. It completely makes sense. And I really like that knock-on effect that has, is he doesn't use his claws throughout this comic book until the end of the Wolverine issues, issue 72. It's the first time he pops his claws in the entire comic book.
Yeah, which we've said about how bloody this book is, but it's not him, it's not Logan, it's all the other characters until the very end where he's like, right, you know what?
Well, he does a few violent things. He runs people over in the spider car and he decapitates the Red Skull with Cap's shield.
Oh yeah, forgot about that.
So he does a few violent things, but he doesn't actually pop his claws until the end of the Wolverine run. And we will get back to that in my conclusion of the episode. But for now, shall we move on to Iain's egg hunt?
Oh, go on then.
Iain's egg hunt. Iain's egg hunt. Iain's egg hunt.
I'm not yoking you. So here we are then, back in the world of Easter eggs in the X-Men universe. First one I picked up on was Wolverine's car reg on his limo, which is WER 112.
Okay.
It could be a reference to two comics. I've not read them, so you might be able to point me in the right direction which comic it could be a reference to.
Okay.
The first one being Uncanny X-Men issue 112.
Right.
Which all that I found out about it really was it's an issue where Magneto turns the X-Men into children.
Okay, yeah. X-babies. Okay, I don't know what that would have to do with this storyline, but okay, what's the other reference?
There's children in the film. The other one is Wolverine 112.
That makes sense, right?
Which depicted like a lonely, guilt-ridden Wolverine where he lives apart from the X-Men. That one's probably more relevant to the film.
I would say so, yeah.
Than the children one.
Okay.
But yeah, I just kind of like that whenever they put a car reg in a film, it's something that I automatically go, right, car reg.
Right.
Must find out what this is.
That's got to be something, yeah. Okay. And it may or may not be, it turns out.
Well, yeah, there you go. There's two options there. And then also, in this film, there are so many callbacks to previous films in the X-Men world. The motel that he meets X-23, that hotel is called Liberty Motel.
Right, okay.
Which got to be a callback to the final scene of X1.
The Statue of Liberty, which is also mentioned by Charles in this film.
It is indeed. And then in Wolverine's hideout, he's got a samurai sword on his wall, which has to be a callback to the previous film.
Yes.
Because that was also directed by James Mangold.
Yes, yeah. In fact, isn't there a line in that film about someone predicts Wolverine's death?
Yeah.
And they say, you will die with your guts spilled out and your heart in your hand, which is essentially what happens here. He ends up with his guts spilled out and Laura's hand in his, so his heart. Yeah. Which makes sense if they were directed by the same director. Yeah, some consistency there.
And then also, we all know that Logan enjoys his cigars.
We do.
And he stole some from a shop.
That's an Easter egg, is it?
Well, it's a callback to him smoking cigars.
It's just a thing that happened in the film, sure.
I'm calling it a callback.
Okay, fine. Is that all you got?
Yeah.
There's loads of X-Men comics in this one. I thought you'd have some about that. He picks them up, he shows them.
They're not real comics. They were drawn by artists who have worked on previous comics, but they're not real comics. There you go. There's an Easter egg.
That is quite a good Easter egg. But they are, they got characters recognisable. They got Sauron, who I realise I've been calling Sauron because I always thought it was like Saw, like a bird or like a dinosaur. But in actual fact, his name's Sauron because he's named after the villain from Lord of the Rings.
Why?
I'm guessing whoever was writing X-Men at the time was a fan of Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, but does that character have anything to do with Lord of the Rings?
I don't know, actually. I haven't read that issue where he's introduced, but I think he says that he took his name from the books. The character says that.
Hold on. You've not read that? I thought you'd read all comics.
I have not read all comics. No. I'm sorry I've misled you.
Podcast a lie. This podcast is a lie. I quit. I'm leaving.
I didn't realise you were under that belief that I'd read all of the comics.
Well, on that bombshell...
Yeah.
Should we move on to the return of Ask the Teapot?
No, because we're on the conclusion next.
Okay. On that bombshell. No, you know what? Leave that in and let's go to the conclusion.
Okay. What did you make of the film?
Yeah, as I said, enjoyed it then, enjoyed it now. Really good. It's one of the strongest of the X-Men films, if not the strongest.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's enough in there for comic book fans to be like, oh, look, they mentioned so-and-so. But also, it's a good film that stands out on its own.
Yeah.
Your thoughts?
I liked it a lot more than I remember liking it. As I said, I don't think it's a perfect film, but there is a lot more going on with it than I remember giving it credit for the first time around. I like that it uses the idea of the mutants as a metaphor for real world, and I also really like some of the characters introduced. Caliban and X-23, great. Sometimes I think there is a propensity for the film to be overly nihilistic. I understand that they wanted to portray a bleak and hopeless world, but things like the killing of that entire farmer family who helped them out just felt a bit mean-spirited. But generally speaking, I enjoyed the film.
Yeah. I mean, I would say it's been made by someone that has just finished playing The Last of Us, who has some understanding of X-23, or at least has heard the character's name, and, like you said in the opening, has glanced at Old Man Logan.
Yeah.
It's a blend of those three.
Basically, and old westerns, clearly there's an inspiration for that. I think James Mangold might have directed the remake of 3:10 to Yuma, so I think he might even have experience with westerns. Obviously, we see Shane on the TV at one point. They're watching a western film.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's lots of that influence in there as well. But yeah, those do seem to be the primary influences for this film. And what about the comic? What do you think of that?
Again, really good. One that I wanted to read for a long time, so I'm glad that I finally have now picked it up. I think I will probably go back to it at some point. Now that I know the whole story, it'd be quite nice to go back to and read it again. Not right away, but at some point I think I would like to. And you mentioned earlier on about there being Old Man Logan in other comics.
There are, yeah. So they have subsequently made standalones of Old Man Logan. They brought him into the mainstream 616. It is a slightly different version of Old Man Logan because basically there was a big event where all of the universes were destroyed. Doctor Doom, God King Doom, makes a big conglomerate world where all of the little areas, all the different universes have got their own patch. And it's the Old Man Logan from that patch that now exists. So it's based on this universe, but not exactly this one. But that's semantics. Okay. There are further stories about that character, yes.
Is there comics that pick up from the end of this?
Yes, the comics that do occur after this.
I'm not sure about you, but when I put the comic down, especially with the last couple of panels, I could have easily gone to watch The Mandalorian.
Right, yeah. It's got that same Western feel.
Yeah, if you change the characters around a bit, the end of this book, he leaves with a child off on his own little world.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing as The Mandalorian. Am I wrong?
It's a time-old trope, yeah. I mean, it's lots of things, Lone Wolf and Cub, and obviously The Mandalorian, as we said, The Last of Us. So it's quite a common thing. This is adopted child motif with a lone badass. So yeah, I know what you're saying.
Have you got any more thoughts since you've gone back to read it?
So I really like the issues of Wolverine that we get, 66 to 72. I think they're great. The world building and the way that it's expanded upon through the road trip story structure is excellent, as I said. However, I think it should have ended there. I actually think it should have ended with the word snicked before the final shot of Wolverine with his claws out. I think that was a bit unnecessary. And what I really don't like and what I didn't need was the coda giant size Old Man Logan. I think it's completely gratuitous, adds nothing to the storyline that they're telling. And that ending that we get is already implied with him popping his claws.
Yeah.
It didn't need to be shown at all. And it especially didn't need to be a whole issue of Wolverine just going around killing people in a variety of gory ways with absolutely no further depth or exploration to it.
Yeah, since you brought that up, I kind of feel like if they were going to do an issue of just him attacking everyone, then he could have died at the end, or he could have sacrificed himself for the greater good, whatever that is.
Yeah.
I think now that you've brought that to my attention, yeah, you are right. That last issue is just blood and gore for no reason.
Yeah, it's completely gratuitous. Apart from the fact that he ends up with Bruce Banner Jr. at the end of it, there is absolutely no reason for that issue at all. Yeah. Nothing changes from beginning to end, with exception of the last panel.
Yeah.
So, with that said, I would definitely recommend the film to people. However, I would recommend reading Old Man Logan in the pages of Wolverine and stop at the snicked.
Yeah.
Don't bother with giant size Old Man Logan. I don't think it's necessary. I think it actually undermines a lot of what came before it. A lot of the depth of what was there wasn't there anymore. So yeah, that is my thoughts on that. What about you?
I would recommend the film. If someone's seen the X-Men films or not, if this is their first one that they've seen or they've seen all of them before, I would say go back and watch it again. And if you want to watch a black and white version and let me know what it's like.
Watch it yourself.
But the comic, I mean, I think it's going to be one of those comics that either you've gone out to read it straight away or it's on your list of things that you want to get round to, like me. I, again, would recommend the comic. I wouldn't say there's a particular order to read them in because obviously the film's taking inspirations from the book.
Yeah, so you wouldn't say you had to watch the film then read the comic or vice versa. You would say...
No, I would say both. If you had said to me, don't read the last little arc.
The last issue, yeah.
Yeah, if you said to me, stop where it says stink, or whatever the word is, I would probably say to you, yeah, okay, I won't. And then if I bought the book and it was in there, I'd probably read it anyway. Just because I'm that person that I want to see it through.
Because I was reading on the Unlimited app this time around, and so I got to the snikt and I got to the end of that issue and I thought that is really satisfying. And then I actually had to go and find Old Man Logan on the app, open it and read that issue, and I felt a lot less satisfied by that ending than I had an issue earlier.
Yeah.
Depends how you're reading it, I suppose.
So I've got the little book.
Yes.
The omnibus style book.
Yeah, the little trade paperback you got.
Yeah. So if you'd said to me, go away and read it on Ultimates. Unlimited, thank you. Same mistake was made last week.
It was.
Yeah, then I would probably stop there. But because the next issue is in my book, a page turn away, I go, well, I just want to see how this ends. And then now you brought it up, it's a good point.
Well, let us know your thoughts at home if you have read Old Man Logan or if you're planning on reading it, whether you intend to read giant size Old Man Logan as well. But shall we go on to that thing you mentioned earlier?
No, I don't want to do it now.
Okay, fair enough.
That's all from me. Bye.
It's back, everyone. Ask the Teapot is back. We have a couple of questions from listeners that we are going to answer for you. So let's dive right in. First up, at James Howells3 on Twitter asks, my favourite comics follow the anti-hero. I feel that a moral ambiguity provides more of a rich character and depth to the plots. My faves are Spider Jerusalem of Transmetropolitan and Jamie Hewlett's Tank Girl. Who are your favourite morally grey heroes? So, do you want to start with this one?
Well, first of all, let's break down what anti-hero is. There's two words there. So, first of all, what's a hero? No, my two will probably be more mainstream compared to yours, I imagine. So I've gone for Deadpool.
Right.
Because I think he's just fun. He's ridiculous. I've read a few of his comics and seen the films, and I think Ryan Reynolds in that role, perfect. And also just the fact that you've got this character, he is kind of good, but he does ridiculous things that are questionable. He gets the job done, but he doesn't really care who he hurts whilst doing him, which I think when it's played up for the laughs, it works well. Yeah. Punisher, on the other hand, is just like an all-out right, I'm going to gun everyone down because you're all bad guys. From what I've seen, not so much read, but what I've seen, he's a very black and white sort of person. It's right, you're good or you're evil.
His outfit is literally black and white, yes.
Whoa. Save that for the Easter egg on Punisher episode. How about you? Any thoughts on what I've said or your own characters?
Yeah, no. Some good choices there. Deadpool's an interesting one because he's a character who's actually become a lot more heroic in especially the films coming out and things like that. He started off as very much a mercenary for hire, a more villainous character, a foil that would turn up from time to time, and he became, with his popularity, more of a hero.
Yeah.
Especially he was partnered up with Cable, Cable and Deadpool series, that lent him to being more of a heroic character in that. But Punisher is another matter entirely. He is borderline villain as far as I'm concerned, but that is also an interesting take. I think the people who misinterpret that and think what he's doing is a great thing is always interesting, and that's why I like the juxtaposition between him and characters like Spider-Man and Daredevil. Is that these are characters who are doing what he's doing but without killing people.
Yeah.
They are seeking justice, and they are doing so for personal reasons, lost people that have died on them, uncles and fathers, and they haven't snapped and started gunning people down in the street. So yeah, there's really interesting complexities with that character that I feel sometimes are simplified a little bit, and people go, yeah, what a cool guy. It's like, he's not a cool guy, he's murdering people.
I mean, I wouldn't say he's cool, but I'd say it's interesting to watch and to read the little bits that I have read about him.
Yeah. No, there's some really great story arcs that play up that aspect. And there's some lesser ones as well. But yeah, no, some great choices there. And James obviously said some great choices as well. I agree. Believable anti-heroes and anti-villains with understandable, if not justifiable motivations are one of the areas that comic books excel over just about any other medium. I often find that these characters are nowhere near as nuanced when it comes to their on-screen adaptations, where they're often pigeonholed into traditional good versus evil archetypes. Deadpool a little bit in that regard, but also look at Magneto, the X-Men franchise, who over the years he's become one of the most morally complex characters in comic books, but in the films sort of he just has the sudden but inevitable betrayal time and time again. So that's about as morally complex as he gets. As for characters, I'm a fan of Transmetropolitan 2, so Spider Jerusalem is a good one. Some other favourites of mine include John Constantine from Hellblazer and Justice League Dark, which ironically, if they made it into the DCEU, would be a lot lighter than the rest of it. Also, Judge Dredd from 2000 AD, who in the comic books is a far more satirical character than what we've seen on the films, although there were glimpses of that in Carl Urban's Dredd. He's also, interesting, one of the few comic book characters that age in real time, so that's cool. And lastly, I've said it before and I'll say it again, Catman is a great character. And Gail Simone's Secret Six run, which span off from Villains United, is one of my favourite ongoing runs of any comic and is just chock full of great anti-heroes and villains.
Catman.
Right. Also, AniMafia_AMT on Twitter asks, there is a petition gaining traction to recast T'Challa in the MCU. If Marvel decide to, who do you think would be a good recast for the King of Wakanda? So I suppose we'll break this down into two questions. First of all, do you think they should do it? And second of all, if they do, who?
I am not a fan of recasting T'Challa. I think that when you're talking about comic book characters and heroes, the idea of Black Panther still being part of the MCU is doable. I would prefer them to pass the mantle over to someone else than to recast him. Also, because of his suit and the fact that you don't really see the actor behind it, in theory, might be a bad idea, I don't know, but they could have someone in the Black Panther costume killed off in a way. So you don't have to actually recast them. You just say, right, T'Challa died in the Black Panther outfit. I'm not a screenwriter, as we found out in X month, but there must be a way around it where you can sort of kill him off or pass a mantle over without having to CGI Chadwick's face over someone. There's been mixed results coming from the Star Wars films.
Yes.
I wouldn't want to see that, but I'm not a fan of them recasting that particular role.
Right.
What about you?
See, I can see an argument for either camp here. Chadwick Boseman was a terrific actor and his performance as T'Challa was excellent. He lent a real gravitas to the character, but also a warmth and physicality that I think solidified him in a lot of people's mind as the Black Panther. Those are some mighty big shoes to fill, and I completely understand wanting to respect what Chadwick accomplished with the role by retiring the character from the MCU.
Yeah.
However, to a lot of people, the character and what he represents is just as important as any one actor's portrayal. To a lot of people, no matter how good the performance was, the desire to see a continuation of T'Challa's story on the big screen and seeing someone, one of the big things that excited people who look like them up on the big screen being a hero, I think is very important motivation. So I do understand that desire and not wanting to see that storyline come to an end. Personally, I think whatever they do, as long as it's handled respectfully, and I'm sure it will be, I'll be willing to give it a fair shot. And as with all the MCU films, I'll be there opening week to see it.
Yeah. I mean, I can see it now. If some news broke going, so-and-so is going to be Black Panther, they've recast him, so many people will be like, that's it, I'm going to stop enjoying the MCU. Let's all boycott the film. You know, if that happens, I'm not going to be like, no, I'm not going to watch it, because I will.
Yeah.
And like you said, well, I hope that they do treat it with respect and they honour the actor, but also the character.
Yeah, exactly.
Just sort of had a thought, actually, when you were talking there, that obviously going into Doctor Strange 2, the
Multiverse of Madness.
That's the one, thank you. You know, that, in theory, should open up the doorways to other worlds and to parallel Earths. So they could maybe use that as an introduction to carry on the character.
Yeah, and one thing I saw was, as a possibility, is stemming from that, is having Killmonger come back, but as Black Panther. So there are options there. I mean, in terms of recasting then, if you were to recast, do you have an actor in mind?
So, black male actor. Let's go for Rosamund Pike.
I see.
Let's go completely opposite way. No, to be honest, and to be serious, I don't really have an actor in mind. I did have a look, actually. I saw this question come through, so I was having a look online. As we've said before, Charles Xavier, he's a white, bald man in a wheelchair. So you get any actor to play a white, bald man, doesn't even have to be white, just a bald man in a chair. It's the same with all roles, really. As long as they cast a good actor, I don't mind.
Yeah.
I know that you're against fan casting.
Yeah, we're definitely drifting into fan casting territory here, and you know how I feel about that.
You love it.
But just off the top of my head, a couple of actors that I thought of that I'd love to see in the MCU, not necessarily in this capacity, but there's Yahya Abdul-Mateen II and Lakeith Stanfield. So maybe one of them, but any role, really, to be honest, for one of those two would be great.
Yeah. I kind of feel that because it's the MCU, and also because, in theory, this person could be taking over that role, I wouldn't want to see an A-lister.
Right, okay.
I want to see someone new who's been in a couple of films, but I don't want to get like a Brad Pitt or someone stupid like that. Not saying him.
That would probably be the wrong casting choice, yeah. I don't think that would be handled sensitively.
But yeah, I want someone who's quite young, be able to do a few more films like they tend to do with these films. They sign contracts for 4 to 10 films, whatever it is.
Yeah.
So yeah, someone unknown really is what I would go for.
Someone
if
unknown.
they were going to recast that particular character, not so much the mantle of Black Panther.
Makes sense. Right, well, thank you both for your questions, and thank you all for listening. That is the end of this episode of Become the Teapot, and we will see you again in 2 weeks' time. That's all for us. If you enjoyed Old Man Logan, then you can read more about him, more or less, in the pages of his own ongoing title, aptly named Old Man Logan. If you want to read more of Mark Millar's Marvel work, then why not check out his run on Fantastic Four, Civil War, which we'll be covering in a few weeks' time. Or if you really want to see a lot of characters that you thought you liked acting like colossal cockwombles, then why not read The Ultimates? Of course, that description could also apply to Civil War too. Anyway, you know the drill by now. You can email us at becometheteapot@hotmail.com or tweet us at becometheteapod. You can also find us on YouTube, Facebook and Instagram, and don't forget to subscribe on your preferred listening platform. Next episode, we'll be diving headfirst into the watery world of Aquaman as we watch his titularly named film from 2018 and read the first 6 issues of Aquaman Volume 7 by Jeff Johns and Evan Reese. Because what better place is there for a deep dive than the trench?
Bye. See you then, Bob.